Hello, tech leaders. I'm Carol Palombini, fractional CHRO and tech leadership expert, and this is my podcast, TechMind Insights. My mission is to help companies grow with data-driven people management. In this show, I interview leaders and consultants working in the tech space to provide you with real-world insights into the challenges of leadership. If you want to be part of the show or have questions you'd like me to ask my guests, send me a message or a DM on LinkedIn. So today we have James Conroy-Finn as my guest. He's a fractional CTO and coach. James, welcome to TechMind Insights.
Carol, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So could you introduce yourself to our audience?
Happy to, yeah. Where to begin? You did a pretty good job of summarizing. I'm a fractional CTO and coach in my professional life. I was born in the southwest of the UK, moved to Cambridge, moved to London, so I've traveled around a little bit. Just left London about a year ago, so we're in the countryside now. I can take my border collies for walks with sheep and wild birds rather than busy streets of Islington. I'm generally working with tech startups in that kind of fractional CTO capacity or the coaching capacity at the moment.
That's amazing. So we're both working with fractional CTOs, and that's why we decided to put this podcast together, because we are working with fractional services, C-level services, but we have different goals, we have different aspects. So while I help CEOs like grow their vision through people management, through strategic people management, it will help CTOs drive technology through your coaching, right? And today we are going to need your help, you that you're watching us, because we are planning on putting together a course, and we would love your opinion to send us topics or questions so we can put together this 360-degree view of tech leadership to help you and your company drive growth and success. So let's get this podcast started. James, the first question I have for you is, what's your story? How did you become a fractional CTO?
My goodness. Okay, where to begin? So, quite early on in my career, I debated whether or not the traditional sort of 40 hours a week was something that I wanted to do. I thought a lot about the purpose of life and where happiness came from, and did lots of research into what people generally advised made them happy in end of life. And it wasn't things like working later, it was spending time with loved ones. It was being there for the birth of their children. It was these sorts of life events. So I started thinking there are certain things I can only do in my early days. If I want to hike up a big old mountain, I'm not going to be able to do it in my 60s because my hips just aren't going to last that long. And that led me to thinking about some of these ideas around things like 4-day working weeks, which is something that I implemented in one of these startups where I had that influence early on in my career. And I've arguably been fractional ever since. Although I do kind of joke, we're all fractional to some degree, right? We spend a third of our lives in work, a third of our lives in bed sleeping, and the remaining third is for us to do with as we please. The CTO bit just came about. I was in a startup. I was interested in more than just writing code. I wanted to know how we were solving meaningful problems. Who was paying for all of this? We don't seem to be generating any revenue just yet. And I think by virtue of that curiosity and that willingness to work hard, I was recognized and given the opportunity. And that led to other CTO roles, other leadership roles, and hopefully some good answers to some of the following questions.
Yeah, sure. I think I have a similar approach to you. So I decided to become fractional CHRO. I was also looking for more quality of life. And I think that it takes us to understanding how emotional intelligence play a big role from the start in our careers. Because if we know from the start that we want and that how important this part of our lives is, and of course it depends also on your career stage, if you're starting, if you're moving ahead. But I had the same feeling that there's some things I need to do now and I want to do now that I won't be able to do in my 60s. So, and there was something else in my case, I think, about becoming fractional. I noticed I had this short span in each company. So usually they hired me because their HR was chaotic or they didn't even have one. They were growing and they needed to put something together. And I created that amazing strategy, put together the most important policy, practices, and programs. But then routine kicked in. I wanted to put more things forward, more interesting things, but they were super satisfied with what they had, and they just wanted to roll the dice and check and just roll the bones. So, and it was boring for me. It was boring, and I think that eventually the company realized that I was too expensive just to manage something that was already implemented. So when I became fractional, I thought that I could do both of the best worlds. So I could put on the strategy and train someone else to handle and manage everything else. Do you feel the same way? Do you have also this uneasiness of dealing with routine?
I have often said that I love bringing order to chaos. And a lot of the companies that I've been involved with, a lot of the clients that I've worked with, they have some pressing need. And the ask is for me to come in and solve that. The longer term engagements where I've been around for a year and a half, 2 years with some clients, it's been a string of problems. Maybe they want me to come in and help with code and architecture early on, and then they realize they've got problems with the engineering process, the product development process. You want me to help with that. Then they're thinking they're going to hire a head of product, and they want me to coach the COO on how to go about doing that. Maybe their design team needs some help with UX research. So to some degree, I think that's true of everyone, right? We go into some place where there's a need of expertise. Somebody wants you to take on responsibility, and you step up and take ownership of that thing. And then once you've brought order, the novelty kind of dies down, and you're looking for a new challenge, and you want something to keep you entertained. You want something to keep you stimulated. And if it's maintaining a sort of steady state, there's a certain type of person, I think, a certain personality type that probably gravitates more towards that. And most of the fractionals I think I've met, they like solving problems. They're curious people. They want to come in and have that big impact. And once they've had the impact, they're looking for something else. They want to be kept engaged. So maybe it's a personality type.
I think it is, but most of my clients who are CTOs, the clients that I mentor, I think that one of the biggest struggles they have when they go to the C level is actually let go of being the problem solver. Because at some point you have to drive more attention towards the politics, the organizational awareness, how things are decided. You have to get more involved in the business aspect and less involved in actually solving those problems. And I think they get really disappointed by the time they get to the C level, that they lose most of us. And I think that being a fractional CTO, my clients who are fractional CTOs, I feel like they could cling on, although you are strategical and cannot be the one that codes everything, you have more amount of that in your life than when you are working for one organization for a longer period of time. How do you see that?
It's interesting. I don't know that I would say I've had fewer problems to solve when I've been in those sort of C-level positions. I think it's just a different set of problems and different dynamics. You talked about sort of people management and leadership. That's a set of problems that you have to solve. And when there's technology in there as well, it's another layer of complexity. And I think that's where a CTO can really shine. I'm reminded of there are cultural expectations we have, right? Quite often when you see a group of people, the person leading at the front, the entourage is following behind. But in other cultures, the leader is at the back. The leader is watching the people in front, where they're going and what they're doing. I think that idea of sort of servant leadership is represented in that visual metaphor. So if I'm in that C-level position, I want to understand everybody on the team. I want to understand the politics and the challenges and the objectives and try to align and move us in a certain direction. So in that sense, I personally actually find some of those problems more interesting. Right?
Yeah,
Getting a
but I think
computer
that
to do
you're the
something.
exception.
Maybe,
I
maybe,
believe
yeah.
I believe you're an exception because everyone I speak to would just wish they didn't have to do that people management, that much of people management. But I think that it's just a problem of putting your analytical skills into another direction. I think that once, and that's what I try to teach my clients is once you find the data that you need to manage people and how you're going to, and a method that you can follow, it's easier for analytical people, for CTOs and usually tech leaders to kind of get more involved in people management. I think they need like science-based theory, something that can be reliable, so they can get more interested in this. And I think that some of the approaches of leadership, training, and people management are too like soft skill based and not that attractive to, for CTOs to engage. So, but now let's move a little bit backwards. We were talking about your fractional CTO experience and how that happened in your life, but I want to take a step back and understand how you became a C-level executive. What was the biggest challenges, obstacles, or allies you found to get there?
I think you alluded to this earlier, Carol. The stems from the ego, ultimately. The need to move away from being an individual contributor into being a leader, being able to take a step back and let other people have their successes and have their failures. It's something I experienced personally early on in my career. I was, well, a micromanager, frankly, at times. I would be getting far too involved in what people were doing. And I had issues with over responsibility. I felt that the success of the company was really on my shoulders. So if I wasn't in the office, I was at home with my laptop on my lap, evenings and weekends. It had a noticeable impact on my health. It had a noticeable impact on the relationships with the people that I care about. That was a real challenge. I had to deal with some of those self-esteem issues and some of those challenges where I needed to kind of decouple my identity and my value, my self-worth from what was going on in the business.
Yeah, and how did you do that? Did you have any strategies that you use, something practical to share?
I've had therapy in the past to work through some of these things. So talking to somebody else, somebody who will actively listen and ask you the right sorts of questions, I think helps. I've used meditation, moments of reflection, trying to recognize when I'm behaving in a certain way and think about ways I might change those behaviors. They're still with me now. These things will still come up from time to time, but I'm better now at recognizing and then responding rather than reacting. The thought might come into my head that we've got to get this thing done, right? This is taking too long. If this isn't done soon, it's going to reflect really badly on me, and I'm going to be, and the stress might start bubbling up, but I can recognize that as just a thought, right? My mind has kind of created this idea. It's not an objective truth. I can spend a little bit of time there and think, I'd actually kind of visualize it in my head. I think somewhere in here, there's a little kind of organ that's producing this little impulse, and that's all it is. And maybe take a deep breath, rub my fingertips together, wiggle my toes in my shoes, and that brings me back into the present, and I can hopefully choose a more productive course.
Yeah, oh God, and so much to unpack there. So first, you mentioned self-awareness. The first thing is having this analytical mindset towards our own minds. So taking the scientific perspective to take a look at how we behave, our behavior patterns, how we feel. And actually, this is the first step to understand not why you're behaving like that, but what your behavior is. Before you try to understand the reason, to have to understand what you're actually doing and what part of this is your responsibility. Meditation is the second thing I would like to mention here, because this is so useful. Most of the time when you get into this, we call this emotional hijack. So when you have these emotions, usually triggered by beliefs, and in this case, your belief was like, I have to do this on my own. The entire responsibility is on me, and I have to. And having responsibility is actually micromanaging and overseeing every little thing. So questioning these assumptions should be the base for your leadership growth, for moving forward with that. So that's amazing. I love that you share that. So what happened once you got there? Did you have any challenges within the C-level with the other C peers? What do you think was most challenging for you?
My first couple of CTO roles, I didn't have as many challenges with the C-suite as I did in later ones. I think there's a couple of questions that are maybe relevant that I might be skipping ahead to, but the large challenges I think were around a lack of high quality relationships, fragmentation. When those things occur, when you're not a single cohesive team, that did create an awful lot of problems for me in one of my roles.
Oh yeah, but why do you think that is? Do you think that's because of a culture of a CEO of the arrangement? Were you not mature enough? How did you assess this?
It was a mixture of those things, and I think only after the fact, spending some time reflecting, did I realize what had happened. When I was in it, it wasn't as easy to see. The reason that occurred is complicated. There were significant changes in the C-suite within that company. There was a CEO when I joined. That CEO moved into a different role. Another CEO came in and took over, and that CEO was only present to part of the business. So you've got a large change. The new guard haven't really established themselves or built the relationships, and some of the C-suite thought it would be a good idea to act as a sort of mediator or a point of contact. There were physical issues as well. When the new CEO came in, they decided to set up an office on the other side of London. We've been talking about having it out in East London, Shoreditch, where kind of all the techie startups hang out around Silicon Roundabout. They wanted it in West London, so we ended up with 3 offices in and around London within the space of a few months. So there were physical barriers, there were cultural barriers, and people trying their best to help create bridges, but by creating bridges, they ended up dividing the team.
How come?
It was, I mean, it's human beings, right? You get a bunch of people into a room, you present them with a set of problems, and they come up with their own solutions. If they don't come together and communicate effectively, then you get lots of individual efforts and initiatives going on. And I think what it probably needed was a more experienced, more charismatic CEO, which I have had in other companies. One of the early companies in my career, we had I think technically they were co-CEOs, but one was focused on operations. You very rarely saw him. He was quite an introvert. He was in spreadsheets in the office all hours of the day, just making the business run. And then you had the very charismatic CEO who knew everyone by name. And every time he came to the office, he went around and chatted to everyone, made sure everybody was happy. I think it was a very intentional set of roles that they chose to take on. And if you want that structure, that leadership team to work effectively, then you have to think about those things and think about how you take everybody on that journey.
Sure, someone has to do this, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
if you don't have that in you to put together to align your leadership team, most of the CEOs I talk to, they have this problem, like how to align. Like it seems like each C-level, each leader from the team is working alone, and then you try to put things together later instead of working together to put something that works for everyone and that doesn't clash, especially operations and sales and marketing, these things that you're promising something we can deliver, that thing that we know that it's a never-ending story. But I think that sometimes CEOs, they're so busy, like running the business and putting out fires, that they are not intentional about, either they're not intentional or they're not skilled to actually align everyone with his vision, because each C-level, in my understanding, each C-level executive should be aligned with the CEO vision for the company and making that happen in their specific areas. So it should be a collaborative work, but I've never seen anyone like planning actually to gather this this thing. What do you feel about this?
I think you're right. I think to some degree, I mean, you have to ask yourself where the CEO has come from. A lot of early stage companies, somebody has an idea and they work bloody hard to make it a reality. Maybe they have very specific domain expertise. Maybe they're a subject matter expert in some industry. They don't necessarily have the leadership experience, so they have to learn on the job. And where do they find answers? Probably in the leadership section of Waterstones. I don't know. Maybe they're online looking at what people say on LinkedIn, and they're just doing their best to try and get everyone where they need to be while balancing all of their other responsibilities. I think it's part of the reason why you're seeing more and more CEOs look for coaches now, somebody who can come in and help them work these things out, because it's not a skill we're born with, and it's not really taught in school, or mean, maybe in some MBAs, some specific university courses, it might come up. But, if you're technical, if your background is sales, marketing, operations, it's to some degree, I think, something you have to teach yourself.
Exactly. They have to be intentional about developing this because someone has to do this job. And it's like a leverage. If you actually fix this collaboration within your leadership team, you as a CEO will have more time to do the business development and to do actually things that you are the only one who can do that instead of putting out fires between siloed departments and practices.
Yeah.
And in your experience, what are the key differences between being a top-tier engineer and a successful CTO?
I'm going to have to give you a slightly facetious answer to this and say company size. That's how I got my first CTO role, frankly. It was a small company. If I'd have been working in a company with 70,000 people, I wouldn't have got the CTO role, right? So to some degree, it's about being in the right place at the right time and then cutting your teeth and learning and doing a good job and then hopefully being able to turn that into something larger. So CTOs come in all shapes and sizes. Top tier engineers in larger organizations are doing some of what a CTO in a early stage startup would do. Generally speaking, though, the big difference we've already touched on, I think, and it's more of focus on strategy and people. It's something organization wide. Your top tier engineer is going to be working with a team of people and is going to be working on architecture and is going to be going and gathering requirements and understanding the needs of the business. But they're not going to be, I don't know, thinking about how we launch the next, whatever the kind of tech cycle is, right? Whether it's some metaverse thing or NFTs or blockchain or AI or whatever else it is. There's a big strategy, and generally the CTO is thinking about how do we get that AI strategy right. They'll maybe then go to a top tier engineer and say, there's a couple of projects that I'm interested in running. Can you come up with 3 initiatives maybe, right? So there's some sort of delegation, some separation of concerns. But again, very much depends on the company, the scale that you're at. The CTO and founder at a startup is going to be doing very different things to the CTO at a Fortune 500.
Yeah, I think that between the C-level, among the C-level executives, the CTO is the role that changes the most when you are growing at each level, at stage of the company. Because a CFO, he will do practically the same, but it's going to be more complicated, more taxes if you have many companies. And the same thing as a CHRO, I'm going to put on the strategy. But I think that actually changes a lot regarding when we're talking about CTO. And when you mention that, it takes me back to my career choices and how I feel that people are not owning their career instead of like just picking on the options that are given to them, planning their career, thinking about that. So if you want to become a CTO, if that's something that you think is going to be a good option for your life, and you're still an individual contributor, maybe moving to a smaller company where you're going to be like a big fish in a small pond, it's better than being a small fish in a big pond. So that's also about working with awareness, building this organizational awareness and this market awareness to understand that it's not just about your performance. One of the biggest mistakes I see tech people do is hanging on to this belief that if you do a good job, people will notice that and you will be rewarded for that and you will grow, eventually get to where you want to be. Instead of being more proactive and making more choices and actually going after the position or thinking a career strategy. It's more of, if I'm good at how they will notice, I will be promoted. Do you see that happening in the tech industry?
Yes, I think it's probably true of all industries. There was for some reason the first episode of this Penguin show popped into my head where his mum's giving him a pep talk. He's just lost his temper and killed the head of a crime family, and he's panicking and trying to work out what to do. And he goes and he sees his mum, and his mum turns around and says something like, "This you did a good job, and it's time for you to really step up because if you do, this city could be yours." And that pep talk kind of turns him around, and he realizes actually, if I do apply myself, then there's no limit to what I can accomplish. There is that idea that if you are willing to kind of push things, if you are willing to step outside of some of the boundaries, some of the limiting factors we impose upon ourselves, you'll be able to achieve something great. I mean, early on in my career, those first CTO roles, I got them because I asked, because I put myself forward, because I took on those additional responsibilities. I didn't wait for somebody to offer them to me. I went and I tried to take them. So I think there is some truth in that. The flip side is that it's disadvantageous for certain people. Certain people can do that. They have the personality type. Other people who maybe don't have that natural ability will potentially be overlooked.
Yes, exactly. So these people who don't have this natural ability should invest on getting help to
Yeah,
get a plan, get a method. You don't have to do it that yourself. You can get help to build your career plan, but don't expect that things will happen just because you're technically good. I think that the university, especially
yeah,
when you're graduating, you have that very ingrained because all your graduation, your school years, you are rewarded for being technically good. So that's
yeah.
just what you have to accomplish. So that's been reinforced around year and after year. And your first years when you would join the a tech company, it's exactly like that. But then your career stopped moving and you don't understand why you're not moving forward because you were just being taken by the wave instead of actually choosing where you are. And you have now so many choices that if you're not actually proactive and break this introversion barrier to be more proactive than reactive, you're actually going to end up having poor choices to pick
Yeah,
from
yeah,
instead of good, amazing choices to pick from.
yeah. You're absolutely right. I think it's a realization that a lot of certainly people with STEM backgrounds go through. I know I went through this early on in my career. I always thought, you work hard and get good grades and good things will happen. And it's not quite enough. There's more that you have to do. Certainly in larger companies, there's a game that you have to play. There's politics involved. You'll see people who maybe haven't accomplished as much or don't seem as capable as you getting further ahead because they've got skills that maybe you haven't developed. So being that well-rounded person, being maybe empathetic, curious, playing a bit of a game is necessary, certainly in those larger corporates.
Exactly. It's like Marshall Goldsmith always says, what got you here won't get you there. You
Yeah.
have to understand that there's a new set of skills that you must develop in order to move forward, even if you don't want to be a leader. Even if you want to go to a specialist, a consultant road, if you want to become an architect and work not as a leader, but as a specialist, even so, you have to plan that. You have to be proactive.
Yeah.
And that takes me to this expert mindset. What I think is the CTO's hardest issues, the hardest thing that they need to do is letting go of this expert mindset to become more strategic, more open, understand other areas and not just the technical areas. And the challenge especially is with communication. So CTOs struggle with communication issues, especially when they have a non-technical board. And that's my next question to you. Can you describe a time when you or a client successfully advocated for a major technical initiative to a non-technical board?
There's a few that spring to mind. Um, the one I found most interesting was one of my coaching clients. Um, he's raised his Series A in the last year, but getting there was a challenge. He he would describe himself as bold. He was a very innovative person, background in product and technology type businesses. So he was willing to do things differently, and he didn't necessarily want to do what the board told him, and would sometimes find their advice oversimplified his thinking, didn't align with kind of the culture that he wanted to establish. There were things around how he was supposed to scale the business that would come up often. And there was something around how to sell fundamentally. They wanted him to have a head of sales. They wanted him to hire a bunch of salespeople, and he naturally imagined the big bell that rings out ding 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 whenever they're making a sales. And that kind of culture really didn't align with what he wanted in the business. And we had to think about that and work through his fairly common aversion to those sorts of sales environments, and get him to a place ultimately where he could go to the board and say, look, this is how I'm going to run that side of the business. And he came up with something fantastic. He was looking at these sort of sales focused engineers. So he extended his product team with people who would be working with clients, who would incorporate their findings into the product roadmap, the kind of stuff that people with that product and technology background were big fans of. The reason why I like that is because it's a problem that comes up an awful lot. A lot of people in product and technology have this aversion to sales. They don't like it. They find that they're maybe not great at selling. They don't love the money kind of side of things. So the fact we were able to come up with a solution that meant that he could get the growth targets that he needed to raise that Series A, stand up that side of the business, that was a really fun journey to be a part of. Specifically on the tech side of things, one of the other people I've been coaching recently, he's working on his AI strategy. To some degree, I don't think there's a huge amount of pushback from the board. As long as the strategy sounds right, the board that he's pitching to don't really understand this stuff. So I think he had a relatively easy time getting it through. Not to say he didn't put a lot of time and effort into it and do a good job, but he didn't have a deeply technical person who's going to come along and say something about the data quality and the specific models that he was planning on using. So I think knowing who your board are and what motivates them, and developing those communication skills will really get you where you need to be. And then if you have some hang-ups that you have to deal with, maybe a moment of self-reflection so that you can put your best foot forward rather than maybe hamstringing yourself is the advice I would generally give.
And it also seems like in the case of your client that you helped him be more proactive and present a proposal than be reactive to what people were demanding from him, her, from them.
Yeah.
What and it super resonates with my clients as well. Whenever they have to pitch an idea, they never come to me with this. I have to pitch this idea. It's always something like they're demanding something from me, and that's not what I want to do. That's not the way I think. And I think they just should go with what I think because I'm the authority on this. I shouldn't have to pitch anything.
Yeah. They don't get it, right? They don't get it. They don't understand. How do I explain this thing to them? Like, why don't they just, it'd be so much easier if they would just let me get on with it.
Yeah, because they won't understand. So if the assumption, the tech leaders, the assumption they have is if they won't technically understand, why do I have to even communicate that? Why bother? So they don't understand that the technical aspects are the main benefits for them as technical leaders because they have a high compliance in their personality factors, because they're super analytical. And that's the first thing they're going to notice in a communication. But other members of the board are not technical people, and they have different things they're looking for. So you have a CEO probably looking with more dominant personality, probably looking for more numbers and time frames. The CFO is only concerned about the budget and how much you're going to spend with that. He doesn't care the method that you're going to use, as long as you show him a step-by-step budget on how you're going to how much you're going to spend and how much you think it's going to return of investment. And you also have the human resources, people understanding, okay, so what does that demand in terms of people? So is this technology now, do we have people to hire with this talents now? And will this technology be used in 5 years, or we're going to have to change everybody again? So it's understanding each C person mission, C-level executive mission, each one of them have that mission. And if you have it written down, what they expect from you, then you can just create a pitch to address those concerns, because those are the things that are important for them.
Yeah, agreed. Absolutely.
So moving on, because we're almost hitting like 40 minutes. I would love to talk to you about mistakes. Have you ever identify typical mistakes CTOs make when communicating with C-level, with any stakeholder?
I mean, this one's not unique to CTOs, but you touched on this earlier, this, I suppose, again, it comes from this sort of ego, right? It's about people not understanding, not appreciating. You can often misunderstand what somebody's asking of you. So, I mean, with coaching work, a lot of the people I work with, I tend to try to teach them coaching skills, curiosity and empathy. When somebody tells you something, you don't need to default to challenging them. You don't need to defend a point of view. It doesn't need to turn into an argument. You can be curious and you can ask questions. That's wow. I hadn't thought of that. Just so I can catch up, can you give me a bit of context? I'm really interested in kind of where this has come from, you know, and give that person some room to share a bit more information before you maybe default to worrying about your department and what it is you've got to get done. Most of the CTOs I work with don't have the kind of cliche issues where they just start spieling off deep tech nonsense and people don't understand what they're talking about. They are reasonably good communicators. They understand that their job is to deliver impact to the business and to leverage technology. So they don't go into a room and start talking about specific language models and classification systems and whatever else. But no, I think it's more around the curiosity and the empathy. And I think that's kind of true of everyone in the C-suite. When we're busy, when we're under pressure, we have a tendency, I think, to want to make progress. And if somebody comes and asks a question, sometimes you could be dismissive of it because you're thinking, I've got a million things on my plate. I need to get this done. I haven't got time to deal with that right now. So I don't know that the mistakes are unique to CTOs, but I think it does come down to, again, those kind of coaching ideas around active listening, being curious and being empathetic.
Yes, I agree. I think that what you mean is when you are under pressure, you usually fall back into a more reactive state.
Yeah.
And analytical people, reactive state is usually thinking information is communication is about information. If I've given the necessary information, why am I going back to the subject again?
Yeah.
It's really gets reactive instead of understanding communication as an investment. So if there's something there's something blocked, and you need to find out what's blocking that. And your communication can really open this problem, can really solve this problem if you just give it a little bit of real attention with empathy to the other person. So asking questions is a very good habit of empathetic leaders. I always say you're not active listening if you're not asking questions. It's impossible not to have at least one question about what the other person is telling you. If there's an issue, even if you don't agree, there's another thing that I think happens with CTOs. Usually CTOs are very intelligent, really rationally intelligent people. So they are really fast in understanding what the other person wants and needs.
Yeah.
Before the person finishes what they are saying. So sometimes they interrupt to give the answer and forget that sometimes it's not about the answer. It's about being heard.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I mean, I'm hesitant to generalize, but yeah, I'm guilty of that. It happens when I get frustrated when people don't speak quickly enough, and I feel like I've already kind of worked out what they want, and I just want to get to the answer. I have to make a point of not doing that. And to your point, there's the other thing that I've done myself and that I see other coaching clients do quite often is default to solution. Somebody comes to you with a problem and you've kind of worked it out and you're like, here's the solution. Let's get this solved. And actually, before you do that, hearing the person and acknowledging the person, recognizing that they're justified in feeling the way that you do, is a good way of indicating that you're empathetic, because people don't always connect the dots, right? They don't realize that I'm trying to solve this problem because I care. They think, well, maybe they just like solving problems because they're a dopamine fiend, right? But the reality is quite often these people do want to help. They do want to make things better. It's just they don't maybe do a fantastic job of communicating that.
Exactly. And one of the data that I have that's really funny is about empathy. So leaders usually assess themselves with a high level of empathy, and their teams assess them with a very low level of empathy. It's just because you feel empathetic for the person, but you cannot show that. And if
Yeah.
you don't show it, you're not actually being empathetic with that person, because it's how the person feels
Yeah.
about. It's not just about how you feel. So if you don't show it, you're not actually performing that. So that's what I say, communication is the gatekeeper of everything in leadership. If you don't communicate well the way you're feeling, your expectations, and how appreciative you are of that person bringing that subject to you so that you can solve it quicker, then you can create a level of psychological unsafety, even if you have the best intentions.
Yeah.
Because by jumping into those, answering things that people didn't even finish asking, you're almost saying you're too slow and you're too stupid. Let me just solve this.
Yeah.
And then will the person be encouraged to do that again? No,
Yeah. Yeah. Almost certainly not.
almost certainly not.
Yeah.
So that's what I want to say about psychological safety. Psychological safety depends on listening. It's not just being a good boss, a non-toxic boss. It's about encouraging people to come to talk to you,
Yeah.
whatever their issues are. So I have the last question here for you. And I would love if you could give some advice to aspiring CTOs who fear they're not C-suite material.
That's a tough one, because I think that could be caused by all number of underlying issues. My first thought is when someone says they fear they're not C-suite material is that there's some limiting belief in there somewhere. It's very common to find imposter syndrome among product and technology types, where they don't think that they're smart enough, they don't think they're good enough, they only tend to notice the things that they are lacking rather than the things that they have. I think if it came up in coaching, I would be wanting to understand where that fear comes from. I would want to work with that person on maybe recognizing that they do have capabilities. And to be fair, a good coach will be honest sometimes, and that might mean they turn around and say, C-suite isn't a good fit. If you say, I don't really like working with people, I don't really like kind of talking to people. I really don't enjoy one-to-ones when I was a manager. And to be honest, I just want to be writing code all day. Do you think I'd make a good CTO? I'd probably say, probably not. I think you're going to have to do things that you wouldn't enjoy. So there's a couple of facets here. There's the limiting beliefs that we need to maybe get to the bottom of. Then we need to make sure that you have a good understanding of what it means to be C-suite material. And if we've got a good intersection between what it means to be part of the C-suite in your company and what it is you want to do and what it is you enjoy, then there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to go and do that job. Because I've worked with a lot of C-suite people before, and they're not superhuman. They might have a lot of experience. They might work very hard. Some of them are very fortunate and have ended up in that position through good luck. There's no reason to believe that you applying the same level of effort and going out and bettering yourself and improving yourself won't be able to get there. With that caveat again that if you want to just come straight out of high school and become the CTO of Apple, that's probably not realistic.
Oh, yeah. And that's what I always say to my clients as well. Assess. Don't, because if you have these limiting beliefs, it's because you're making something bigger. Usually when we are afraid of something, we put a lot of our expectations, imaginations there. It's like a void where you fill with all your fears. But
Yes.
once you assess it, like you understand, what does the market demand from a C-level executive, from a CTO in this case, on this stage of the company? Because we know that we have to have different assessments for
Yeah.
different company stages. And do I fit or not? It's a data thing. You can actually put that in an assessment and understand how far you are from this ideal state and what it can bring to the table that's only unique to you. And that usually lies on your personality and how you handle people, how you deal with different personalities, how you are able to adapt to different environments. So my advice for aspiring CTOs is actually make an assessment. Be realistic, get data before judging yourself as non-valid or not C-suite material.
Yeah, good advice.
And now the last thing, I always ask my guests to bring one suggestion for a book or a content, a podcast that relates to leadership. And what did you bring us today?
I brought something that's maybe a bit different, I think. It's a book called From Strength to Strength by Arthur C. Brooks. The central kind of tenet is around growing old, the inevitability of our sort of progression through life. He talks about the way the brain develops. In earlier life, we have this sort of fluid intelligence, and the fluid intelligence is what allows us to come up with some grand unifying theory in physics, right? Or develop some brand new aspect of mathematics. And whether we like it or not, that fluid phase diminishes. It's why, you don't see the great physicists after they're sort of 30 years old. And the same thing applies to software engineers. Early on in your career, you're going to be able to do things and have these sort of moments based on your fluid intelligence that you won't be able to have in your 30s, 40s, 50s, and onwards. What you do have is what the author calls crystallized intelligence. So the best historians are in their 60s and 70s potentially, because they've had decades and decades to build experience and to learn, and they become fantastic teachers. A lot of the strengths that come from crystallized intelligence are the same strengths that you need as a leader, to be more wise, to be more tempered, to be more informed. So the reason I bring up that book is because I think to some degree, we all need to become leaders as we get older. We all need to recognize that our strengths and our abilities change with time, and working on those skills, becoming a more well-rounded person, preparing for those later stages in life where you're probably needing to dedicate yourself more to letting younger people succeed, maybe creating the environments where they can do their best work, where they've still got their fluid intelligence, is something I think worth thinking about. And we've touched on this a few times around career development, getting to where you want to in life. There comes a point, I think, where it's a good idea to think about the reality. I think in Hinduism, they talk about these sort of 4 stages of life, right? We have these 4 kind of major stages in our life, and different stages are going to be lived differently. Planning for that, thinking a little bit about that. This book does a very good job of talking about some of those ideas. And I think if you invest that time, then ultimately when you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s and beyond, you'll find that you are probably a very good natural leader.
Yeah, to give it a chance, right? Be
Yeah.
open-minded and give it a chance. Don't create these blockages about and pre-assumptions about things that you have never experienced. Maybe you don't like it now, but maybe you will like it in the future, and you will see some value in that. So I love that, James. A perfect way of closing this. It has everything to do with mindset growth.
Yes.
So shifting from the expert mindset into, we call it in vertical development, a redefining mindset, growing and becoming more wiser. I think that it's all I wish to all my clients, like they become wiser with time and grow their skills in a productive way that will adjust and adapt to the needs that we have once we're aging.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I think that's good advice.
And if people want to reach out to you, how can they do that?
Well, I have the benefit of having a very unique name. If you Google my name, everything that shows up is about me. You can go on my website. If you Google me, jamesconroyfinn.com, all of my links to my social media are on there. I'm on LinkedIn and Mastodon, and I've taken myself off a few of the other social media platforms for personal reasons, for mental health and productivity gains. But yeah, there's an email address on my website if you want to reach out. You can mention me on Mastodon. You can find me on there. And as I say, it's all linked from the website, jamesconroyfinn.com.
Perfect. So thank you, James, for being my guest today. And if you want to be part of the show or send us questions, just DM me or send me an email. And don't forget, please, to send us topics and questions for us to include in our course to take a 360-degree approach on tech leadership development. And I'll see you on the next TechMind Insights. Bye.